All right, we'll call to order the City Council and Planning and Zoning Joint Plan Development Workshop agenda for Monday, November the 11th, 2024, at 4 o'clock p.m. Happy Veterans Day, each and every one of you. With that, moving to roll call and certification of quorum. Madam Secretary, I will certify we have a quorum of City Council present, as all members are present with the exception of Councilmember Tooman, who I believe is out of town and won't be here the remainder of the evening. With that, I'll turn it over to the chairman to do the same.
Thank you, Your Honor. All members are present for the Planning and Zoning Commission except for Commissioner Jennifer Hendricks, who is on her way.
Sounds good. With that, Madam Secretary, do we have any citizens' comments presented? None? Okay. Then we'll move to item 5, purpose of the workshop. Number 1, discussion regarding the Unified Development Code, UDC update. With that, Trent, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council, as well as the Planning and Zoning Commission and Chairman. I want to welcome you to the initial workshop on updating our Unified Development Code. One of the places we always like to start is with our strategic priorities and our why, and why we're updating the Unified Development Code. Our why is to be the community of choice, and that's supported by several strategic priorities. One of those is strong economy, which is part and parcel to this effort of updating the UDC. And there's multiple milestones associated with the strong economy that support the UDC update, including attracting new investment, driving future growth through redevelopment, and reinvesting in older areas. This effort is also supported by our recently updated and adopted comprehensive plan and the ongoing Old Town Revitalization Plan. So tonight's the kickoff of the kickoff meeting for the UDC update, and we need your feedback and the feedback from the Planning and Zoning Commission tonight to make sure that we have all the concerns with the current UDC, all the points of emphasis, all the topics to focus on during this process identified. We're not fixing any problems tonight, but making sure that all concerns are identified so that this really constitutes a brainstorming session to make sure we have all those things out there. The work we are starting tonight will set up the city for strong quality development and redevelopment throughout our build out as we continue towards that. And that ultimately translates into assessed value, which ties into our strategic priority of resilient finances. So the update to the UDC supports multiple strategic priorities. So at this point, I want to introduce and turn it over to Claire Hemphill with the Design Workshop. They're our consultant that will work through this process with us and lead us through the presentation and discussion tonight. So all yours, Claire. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good evening, Mayor, council members, and commissioners. Thank you so much for having us and giving us your input tonight. My name is Claire Hempel. I'm a principal with Design Workshop. We're a planning and landscape architecture firm, and really excited to work with the City of Pearland on this initiative to update the UDC. So I'm glad that my laptop's working with me here. What we'll go over tonight is introducing the team, the project, the scope. We'll go over the timeline, and then what this project is, diving into a little bit more to the anticipated community engagement and what kind of topics we might discover and investigate while we're working through this. And then we'll throughout this, if you have any comments or questions, please do feel free to interrupt me. Wrong button. All right. So Design Workshop is going to be working as the prime consultant with Kimberly Mickelson, who is a land use attorney in the Houston area. With me today, I have Jessica Garrow and Tarana Haviz, who will be all working from Design Workshop on this project together. But most importantly, we're working with community and key stakeholders like yourselves, the stakeholder committee, and the broader Pearland community, working closely with city staff to think through and update the code as the comprehensive plan has at a high level outlined, and working through those details with you all. So the importance of a UDC or development code is that This is the code that sets forth well-planned communities and vibrant neighborhoods. This really amplifies the character that the community of Pearland wants to put forward to visitors and people that live here and work here. This drives quality and smart development practices that help to attract those residents and make Pearland the community of choice. It provides a sense of place, unified character, and identifiable districts within the city, and also helps to create connected and accessible places. The UDC can also help to provide economic growth, amplify property values and investment and competitiveness that make people want to live here and grow their families here and stay here for a long time, lead that good quality of life. So the strategic priorities that were adopted during the comprehensive planning process will be front and center during this process. So a little bit about what the UDC is for those that may be listening or watching. I know you all work with it in just about every meeting, every day of your lives here. But this is a comprehensive document that consolidates the zoning and land development regulations. This includes what parcels are zoned as, what your land use is, your landscaping requirements, such as tree planting, shrubs, screening, turf coverage, and the kind of open space, the percentage and amount of open space that's dedicated, setbacks and percent of lot coverage. So this is the building itself, how far it's set back from the road and the right-of-way, and from different nearby buildings, and the amount of land that a building can take up. This covers the subdivision requirements that a developer will have to follow, the design standards, or what these buildings, facilities, these places will look like, and the review procedures that staff and elected leadership will have to go through to make developments happen. So the UDC can work to streamline the approvals process and permitting process by removing inconsistencies and outdated policies. So one of the things that we might investigate here, if there were consistent variances that were requested for a certain element, that might be something that we would want to look into and decide with staff and you all how we want to handle those inconsistencies. And then finally, the definitions aspect of a UDC is very important, as we're all defining through the UDC what we mean by different terms. And with this update, the graphics that our team provides for the update will be very important to describing exactly what we mean when we say building height or a setback. As you can see in the illustrations at the right, these are just a couple of examples of where you might, or what the graphics in the UDC update might look like. So a UDC can help you address some of the things that you see in the photos here. The top left is showing some driveways that may not be long enough to accommodate the types of vehicles that are parking there. So that's definitely something that the UDC can accommodate by ensuring that those buildings are set back far enough from the road to allow a car or multiple cars to park there. The bottom left is just a blank facade, so the UDC could add in something like fenestration or articulation to a facade in a way that makes that more interesting and palatable. The bottom right photo is showing a sidewalk that over time hasn't been maintained, and so the walking area is actually quite narrow, even though that when it was first built, it would have been wider. And so the code enforcement aspect of the UDC is also something that would be addressed. And then finally, the top right, although this is a nice strip center, you have some awnings and landscape tree areas, where the comprehensive plan talked about in key areas making Pearland more walkable. This could be an area that addresses maybe distance to the door from a parking space, for instance. And what the UDC can help you achieve, that placemaking aspect, that character of Pearland aspect, So the open spaces that we have and how the houses face onto an open space, as you see in the top left-hand picture, allowing for different types of housing to be built, as you see in the top right picture. The bottom left is showing mixed use kind of development where you've got code that would have dictated the amount of patio space for that cafe and seating area outside of an institution. And then finally, at the bottom right-hand side, activating these spaces, say in Old Town, for instance. Maybe we're looking at areas that could be used for gathering. In this example, this is up north where it's a little bit colder, so they have an outdoor fireplace. But this area is active day and night and helps to provide more people coming to those stores for economic value. So the project is sent. We are going to be, the UDC will be applied all over the city of Pearland. And working from the information that the comprehensive plan put forward, there's 76% of the land within city limits has already been developed. So the code is really going to help guide that last percentage that is yet to be developed, and also look at redevelopment opportunities and helping imbue the character of Pearland within what comes next. So a little bit about our scope. We've divided this into 4 phases, and we're currently in the first phase where we're getting started. We're hearing from you all, from staff, from our stakeholder committee about what the challenges are with the code today, what things they would like to see addressed, maybe topics that we look at. And then we'll get going into our research of the code as it is today, bringing in our experience from national best practices, statewide best practices, and other benchmarking to help explain some ideas that we might have around gaps in the code or what the code could address. In that third phase, this is where the code update starts to occur with a lot of conversations and redlining of a document. And this is an 18-month process, so this isn't in a couple of weeks. The phase 3 is where we get to a 50% draft update, and then finally a 90% draft update. And then finally at phase 4 is where we'll have public hearings before it becomes adopted, if so chosen to do so. So here's more of a visual of that scope and the process. We're at the very beginning stages of the project, just kicking off, and we met with our stakeholder committee just before this meeting, and we have 5 touch points during this entire process with you, council, and P&Z to work with us as we go through. So that idea being we're getting your feedback at every step of the way, and you should really feel your fingerprints on this code update as we get to the end. And so that's, we want to hear your feedback. We want to hear what you think is missing. Any of that is really helpful as we get started on the process and throughout. So we've crafted a vision statement. This was based on initial conversations with staff from the RFQ before design workshop was even brought on, thinking through the comprehensive plan and what rose to the top there. If you have any thoughts on the vision statement, either after this meeting or even during, please let us know. Even if we don't hear anything tonight, this is a draft, and it won't be a finalized vision statement until we get to the end of the process. But the idea being that this is through a collaborative process with stakeholders, the existing code will become streamlined, adaptive, clear, and a user-friendly document for staff and the development community that will create opportunities for improvements in the public and private realms. And so the end result is that this document is very user-friendly, has graphics to help explain concepts and intent, and that will just make for a cleaner, more efficient process that results in the outcomes that you all want to see. I'll pause for just a moment to see if there's any comments on that vision statement. And no worries if not.
Thank you for stopping. I guess you just mentioned in diagrams for intent. How that sounds good now, but 6 years from now, when this is adopted, how does the intent carry forward in the document? And I'm all in favor of giving staff some leeway to get to a yes. But when we talk about intent now, I can guarantee we may get 7 votes for some intent now, but that's going to change next May. And it'll change again the following May.
Hi, for the record, Jessica Garrow, a principal with Design Workshop. One of the really important pieces of a code update is identifying purpose statements that help articulate what is the intent of a particular standard, a particular zone district. So that's part of what we would anticipate as we move forward. And then that will be articulated further in any standards requirements as well as in the illustrations that are part of the code. Would say land use code tends to be a document that you do want to look at every 5+ years to make sure that it's still meeting your intent as a local government. And so while this update is intended to implement the comprehensive plan and address some of the key issues that we hear from you all, it's not going to be the final land use code that the city adopts in all likelihood, right? There will be adjustments as you move forward.
Yeah, I don't know that you can write intent into the ordinance. So somehow, some way, we've got to capture it through the document, and I think that's what you're trying to say. Obviously, future councils, if they want to change things in the document, they can go through and amend and adopt and do all those kind of things as normal. But it would be in a obviously in a transparent fashion, because they'd have to go through public hearings and whatnot. And I mean, I think the draft vision statement, this is getting to where we're intending. It does talk about staff and the development community. Let's also not forget that just citizens in our community that want to do something at their home, they can go and understand in plain English what it is they need to accomplish. Part of the problem with the document now is you got to have an attorney or an engineer hired to even understand, one sentence out of it. And so, if you're a homeowner and you want to do something at your home, you should be able to look up and understand, okay, I get it. This is what I got to do. There still may be some questions, but I don't want to leave the homeowner or the existing community out of that.
Thank you for the comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I would agree with that. A few just pieces of feedback off of the information you've given so far. And I'll talk about this one first since we're there. One question I guess I would have both for staff and council is, this says, we're going to do this update and the document for staff, residents, and the development community that will create opportunities for improvements in public and private sectors. One of the things we're talking about is the last 24% of the developable property in our community. Do we want to create a UDC that will, and I'm not sure what you mean by create opportunities, so if we could maybe create opportunities out, because I don't think the UDC is designed to create things to come to the community. It's designed to regulate what's brought to the community. And so my question would be, are we looking to attract development? Because at least in my world and feedback that I get from people in the community, our UDC in some ways prevents development in our community. And so as we're looking at it, are we wanting to have some language in the vision that explains that, yeah, we're looking to attract development in our community to create jobs, to create the mayor's vision of reducing commute for our residents, to increase value on the ground, things of that nature. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think that that was the intent when what we meant by create opportunities. So I think that wording you suggest is a clear way to say that.
Okay. Otherwise, I think that was great. And other things, I had a clarity question. Previous slide, you'd said 18 months. I'm assuming that was 18 months to get to phase 3. And then there's an additional window of time from 3 to 4.
So essentially, we're wrapping up in the spring of 2026.
Okay, so the whole process is 18 months.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so it's not just to phase 3, that's to phase 4. And then the last comment that I'll have on what you provided so far is back on page 20, one of the goals, I guess, of this is to streamline the permitting process. And I just wanted to call that out as saying, thank you for identifying that is something that we need to do. Because again, if we're going to try to attract development in our community, we need to have a permitting process that is user-friendly and workable as well. So thank you.
Commissioners?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, don't forget redevelopment opportunities, right? I mean, we're down to 24% or so for current developable land, but there's a lot of redevelopment opportunities. I think in Pearland and more will come along as we go. So it needs to be focusing on redevelopment. And I think, what incentivizes or makes redevelopment easier as well. And I also just like to say, I mean, this UDC is not new, right? The current one we have has been around a long time, and it's been here for the majority of this growth spurt we've had as a city, right? And most cities go through a 10 to 20 year growth rate, and we've done that, right? We hit early 2000s to a few years ago was our big upward swing, and so it's not. I think there needs to be some realization that development came, the city worked with that development, our UDC and our staff worked with that development. And so we need to tweak things, we need to clean up things, but there's been a lot of good work under the UDC and by staff in the city in that time period as well. Thanks.
I would like to interject also. When you're looking at the UDC and making these changes, we have established neighborhoods that there's remodels going on, there's complete tear down and rebuild going on. And with the present UDC, you have to meet all of the present codes on drainage, i.e., and it creates problems when you have established neighborhood that the drainage is set, the entire neighborhood is set that the back half of the lot goes to a drainage area and the front half goes to the street, especially when you have some retention. So I think we need to look at how the present structure of the drainage is and make certain changes for that neighborhood. I mean, the other thing is if you completely tear down, according to the old UDC, it's looked at as a new development. And so that one lot is permitted as a whole new development, which that in itself is very cumbersome and difficult to get through all the permitting. So I think in the UDC, I would like to see not just neighborhood, but also lot, have a section in the UDC for rebuilds and also the present established neighborhoods, let it be continuing in the way that the neighborhood was designed.
Great feedback. Thank you.
I had a couple of questions just from a better understanding. I'd like to understand what the stakeholder committee is that you all mentioned. I think you even said y'all met prior to this meeting. So I'd like to understand who's on that stakeholder meeting, committee. That's one thing. And secondly, is this the time that we give all the thoughts we've had?
No, we're up until this point. We'll let them go through the rest of the presentation as we do.
That's what I was,
Yeah.
yeah. And I'm,
Yeah, because I got a laundry as well, but I think they stopped on this vision statement, kind of
Yes,
get feedback on this, and then we'll go through it.
thank you.
There was a question about the stakeholder committee. I think you can answer that.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. So similar to all committees, and I guess I don't mind just to interject real quick on some of the purpose of why you are the steering committee. So the workshop concept was just a way, this has been a project that's been talked about for years now, and it's something I think we're all really excited about for different reasons. And through that, on typical stakeholders, there's only 2 or 3 of y'all and 2 or 3 of P&Z. And with this, we wanted everyone to be able to sit at the table and get their hands on it. And so that's where these joint workshops came in, as far as letting P&Z and City Council serve as the steering committee. But with that, we're still going to want to have a stakeholder committee. We'll be reaching out to each of you to make suggestions similar to we did for Old Town, and this will be a smaller stakeholder. On Old Town, it ended up being 50 people. This, we're envisioning maybe 15 or 20 people as a stakeholder committee that'll meet in tandem outside of these meetings, but we'll meet at a similar pace of the workshops.
The folks that I mentioned that we met with today were representatives from transportation, parks, engineering.
Internal.
Yes, yes.
Koza?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Claire and Jessica, for being here this evening. The presentation you've been given here is a little bit different than the presentation we received in our packet prior to this. It was more kind of who y'all are and what y'all do. One thing that caught my eye throughout this document that was presented to us, there is quite a bit description of design workshop being urban design, urban planning, urban designer, urban designs, all throughout this document here. Pearland is kind of a bedroom community that's more suburban, and anytime those words start popping up, we have people that get a little bit alarmed about we don't want to urbanize Pearland. So I don't know, wanted some clarification on that and kind of what everything about being urban is about.
Yes, so urban design is an industry term, if you will, of just how we learn how to plan for communities, for spaces. So that's everything from setbacks of buildings, whether it's in a community such as Pearland or if it's further into outside. We do a lot of work in the outskirts of metropolitan cities, but it's not meant to be a term that connotates high rises and things like that. So apologies if there was some concern over the term urban, but we work in communities all across the country of all different sizes and just bringing those national best practices as planners and designers.
It's like I said, I had urban, suburban, rural, those types. So when I saw that, it kind of niched y'all into one lane that was brought up to me as far as that goes. So thank you for the clarification.
Good deal. And I want to echo what John McDonald said. The UDC in next year will be 20 years old. So it was adopted in 2005. And I'm sure somebody can do a query and we can find out how many times we've amended it, quite a few times. But more importantly, it was the same way. We passed, and it was like, if and when we have a certain number of people trying to change things or go against the UDC, or we see a consistency in requests, then it was like, we need to listen to the market. We need to listen to what's being said here. Is it something that we're just trying to say no to our rule, or is it something that's in the marketplace that's, so, if you see the same variants over and over and over, come back in, that was a clue that maybe we need to go into our UDC and look at updating along the way. I know that happened, like I said, quite a few times along the way. You know, to echo Tommy's point, you know, I think we want to make sure that as we go through this, if we're changing current rules, which I haven't really heard that that's what we're doing, we're trying to make the document user-friendly, more user-friendly. But if we do change current rules, making sure that we don't set up the 76% that's already been developed for massive nonconformance. So we can have that discussion as we go through this. But I don't know, that's one of the things that I want to make sure that, yeah, we're going to make it more user-friendly. But if we change a whole slew of rules, what does that mean for people, you know, that have developed over the last 50, 60, 70 years? Are we setting up a nonconformance issue down the line that then becomes a real problem? So, but at the same time, we want to encourage redevelopment. We want to encourage that. We need to have something in the document that's encouraging in that, which is creating opportunities for that. If our rules are too rigid and too difficult, somebody looks at it and says, I'm not going to touch redevelopment because it's going to be too hard to do. So we need to figure out, you know, how we do it. So with that, back to Mr. Cousins.
Thank you, Mayor. The slide that you had up here that said scope on it, could you go back to that real quick? Right there. So in here, looking at the, to me, this layout right here was a little bit more concise as to when we come back and have meetings. It's kind of looks like here that we're going to have workshops between P&Z and City Council. In the presentation given to us, there were maybe one or two council P&Z workshops, if you want to call it that. There was quite a few P&Z updates, P&Z this and P&Z that. One thing that I would suggest to you is the more involved you have council with P&Z, when we get to the adoption phase, there will be a lot less heartburn at that juncture. And so this slide right here kind of showed that better than the presentation that was given to us, because it seemed like council was left out of most of it except for here and there, and then at the end bring council in.
And I think we got their updated one, like.
That's fine. That's fine.
This
is what I read, and this is what I had. And so that's why when I read it, I was a little concerned about that as well. So.
Sure, and maybe just to clarify, what was attached in there was, I believe, what they put together and was part of their proposal as we evaluated the different consultants before we made a selection and developed our scope of work. So I think that's why that looks like that versus that was kind of their introduction to us, like you said. And so, you know, we didn't have the presentation attached until today that we're seeing tonight, and that'll walk through the actual what the plan is. So,
well, like I said, it was confusing in this.
Sure.
You know, I guess when we're required to put documents, we got to have it a week out in advance. So, kind of that's back on that confusion. So, anyway, thank you.
Chavarria.
Thank you, Mayor. Task 1.2, Community Engagement Plan, it discusses stakeholders. Who will be identifying the stakeholders, and who are they?
So Vance mentioned they're going to be reaching out to us to put a group of 12 to 15 together for
Okay,
you.
I apologize, I didn't hear that.
All right, let's move on.
All right, so critical success factors are a little different from goals. You can think of these as results that the project should accomplish for you all to see this as a success. And so we've brainstormed a few here, but would love to hear your feedback and thoughts if we're missing anything. So the first being align the City of Pearland's UDC with the latest comprehensive plan. And something that has just kicked off is the Old Town Revitalization Plan as well. So making sure that those plans all align with the UDC. It should be streamlined, intuitive, user-friendly, and supported by strong graphics. So we've had conversations about how this will be integrated with GIS, making an online tool really easy to click on and understand the process and what you might need to be required to do if you want to develop or redevelop. Modifying the code to add flexibility for creative development, preservation, and infill strategies. Establish objective standards that enable a sense of place in Pearland. on time and on budget through every stage of the process. This is something for the consultant team, so we're keeping things moving and staying on budget. And then this is, of course, fully supported by city staff, the stakeholder committee, city council, P&Z, and the public. So I'll pause there and see if you have any feedback.
Kate?
When you say strong graphics, you mean, and you said GIS, strong graphics and GIS?
Yes, so the city has a really robust GIS system already, but just supplementing that with what comes of the update and making sure that we're building upon that even more and making it really clear with graphics, supplemental graphics.
Okay,
Yeah, picture paints 1,000 words
sure.
if it's done properly.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies, for coming here today. One of the things I keep hearing in this process ever since I got on here was this is going to be an easier process for our users. The one thing I would ask you that this process should be cost negative on staff. We shouldn't have, because of this new UDC rewrite, staff shouldn't come back to us in 2 years and say we need to add more people to implement this. It's very important that you understand that. To me, if you ask me what success looks like, it should be cost negative.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Koza?
Trent, this presentation that we have here, could you get that emailed to us so that we all have it?
It's now attached to the agenda, so it's available to you in iCompass. We can have it emailed out as well if you want to.
Okay, well, that's what, like I said, I haven't read anything today, but
Yes.
I wanted to be able to go back and review it.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Thank
Jerry, you got some comments?
Yes, sir.
Is the on time and on budget through every stage of the process, is that related to y'all's work or staff's, or can you clarify that?
Sure, that's more of a project management for the consultant team, making sure that we're keeping the project on time and on budget. The goal being no requests for change orders.
I have just a comment on the modify the code, the third one down, add flexibility for creative development, preservation, and fill strategies. I think of all the bullet points, I think that's the most important. We've got an old town site that continues to churn. We have some new development there, but there's a lot of the town, a lot of Pearland, 24% undeveloped. There's reasons that hasn't been developed. There's developers out here, they're passing us up and going to Manville and Alvin and Iowa Colony and other towns down the 288 corridor. And there's a reason. It's either utilities, it's difficulty working in Pearland, maybe because of the UDC, or just difficulty accessing parcels and getting enough clientele to come purchase what the developer might want to build. As well, it's the zoning itself that may be part of the issue. Certain areas zone certain ways, and the frustration or the time and expense to come through and navigate those things. But there's many examples, and I'm sure Martin could come up with them in advance as well, of people that have had challenges, just what you said earlier, challenges getting through the system just to try to make a change, whether it's a homeowner or whether it's a business person that purchases a building and thinks they're going to make it an office. They're zoned correctly, but the changes that they have to make and the permitting that they have to, the hoops that they have to jump through, it can be quite daunting. And that's the exact opposite of what we should be doing. We want a nice product, but if the end product isn't going to get there, it's almost the means justifies the end. Do we make it difficult for them to get to that point? So those were my comments. I've got a ton of them, specifics, but this is not the time yet.
Sorry, excuse me. I think this third bullet point, to echo Commissioner Eccles' point earlier, I agree. There could be something added in there, and that may be what you mean by preservation, or the 76% of our community that is developed when they get into redevelopment or remodeling or things of that nature, that our UDC doesn't try to make them reinvent the wheel that's completely different from what's right next door to them. And is that what you meant by preservation in this point?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I want to, we'll talk about it now because I think modifying, the code to add flexibility for creative development, preservation, and infill strategies. So when I look at the UDC and what does success look like on the back end of it, I'm just going to talk philosophically for a second and then get into some specifics. Currently we have a UDC, C for code. Code is a little more rigid than having flexibility. Having guidelines opens up the opportunity for flexibility. And I'll give you an example. If you're driving down 518 and you see a retail establishment or retail, spot that's been built in the last, several years, you'll see, they have certain number of parking spaces are required, certain amount of landscape is required in the parking lot and those types of things. And I think all of that is great, and I think it has made our developments look better, feel better, and those types of things. But when it gets to the execution of it, and this is some of what we're talking about, the execution of it, you got to have, thou shalt have X parking spaces, thou shalt have X of the parking lot landscape area. And so sometimes, and same thing, you got to have X percent of glass, you got to have X percent of certain things. So I'm thinking out loud here, why not have guidelines? Because Joe Pearlander driving down the road, I don't think he knows that, your parking lot should have 15% in landscaping. I don't know that they would know the difference between 12% and 15%, 12% or 17%. But if you had some guidelines which allow then designers and planners to design these establishments a little more flexibility, and it's written in the UDC that way. For example, it should be no less than 12%, no more than X percent. Now you've got a guide that's there that they can maneuver to make it happen. That's an example, I think, of flexibility, and that may be what you're talking about, but that's kind of how I see that. It's going to be interesting as we move to infill strategies, especially compact residential, which is in the comprehensive plan. I'm assuming that through this process, we're going to figure out what that looks like, what that design standard is, what that criteria is going to look like, give everybody a little bit of a history. Pearland has had in its regular, residential, code, a minimum of 5 foot side yard setback, aggregate 15 for the two. Most developers just did 7.5, 7.5. And little known secret, that was a way to control density. That's how this, so a 50-foot lot automatically became a 55-foot lot, which is why you've got a lot of 55s, 65s, and 75s across the community. Because if you're going to do a typical 50-foot lot, you typically have a 40-foot product that goes on it, 5 yard, 5 yard, in almost every city around the greater Houston area except here. We're an anomaly when it comes to that. And so the aggregate 15 was done 30 years ago to help control density. You gave up density when you did that. So I think also success coming out of this is we have an Old Town guidelines. How does that look? How does that feel? Working with the Old Town site redevelopment initiative as well, but we can't apply greenfield development standards to the Old Town site. So what does that look like? Again, redevelopment, so we can do that. We've had conversations with Mr. Patel and others about how about hotel guidelines, hotel criteria. What does that look like moving forward? One of the things that we said that we want to accomplish with the UDC rewrite is how we address some things in our hotel community. Okay, we can talk about that as we move forward. Something that we don't have as far as guidelines are concerned is build to rent. They're either retrofit into our residential guidelines, or we put them in a PD, which is fine. But should we have a build to rent criteria and guidelines? So if somebody's coming in to do that, we can talk about the zoning, we can talk about all that, yes, no, or maybe. But if the answer is yes, there should be a criteria and a guideline to go by, that we've fully vetted that this is what we want to see. Multifamily criteria, while we don't really have multifamily land on the books out there, if somebody comes in and we have told people we want to see more of that urban mid-rise look and feel, but we really don't have a guideline for what that looks like. So should we have a guideline coming out of this? So if somebody has one, that's the guideline we want you to go by. I mentioned compact residential. I will say ADUs, legislature's going to pass ADU legislation probably by the time before you guys get finished with this. So I would suspect that by the time we're in the middle of 25, we're going to be having a discussion of what ADUs looks like from a state perspective. The state's also going to pass, more than likely, the small lot, 1,400 square foot lot, probably during that process as a minimum lot size. What does that look like? How do we address that? What is our response to that in the market? I think we don't have to solve that today, but that's something that the legislature is more than likely going to approve. So we need to have that discussion at some point. What does that look like here? What does most developers are going to use it as a negotiating tool with cities. Here's what I can come and do, but if you'll give me 45s and 50s, I won't do it. That's probably how that's going to be used, but we should still have a criteria on the books of what does that look like in our community. Do we need a mixed use criteria? A lot of people come in and say, I want to do a mixed use here. What does that mean? What does that look like? How does that, feel down the line? And so again, and then I did say, if we foresee changing a lot of our current rules, if so, how do we deal with creating a lot of nonconformity? And that's a legal term, and we get into the legal side of thing, and Lawrence and Darren and others can figure out, maybe how we do that. But I don't want to create a lot of problems for residential users and business users down the line, where they have to come in and get special exceptions, come in and have to get variances because we changed the rules, per se. And I know you're not looking to do that either, but I want to call that out. This is, when I see critical success factors, these are things that I hope we see on the back end of it that we've answered. And to the Mayor Pro Tem's point, we're going to get some of that wrong. We're going to get some of it where we missed something. We're going to have to come back in and amend it over time. So I'll open it up for anyone else on the critical success factors.
I think a lot of the points you just made are great, and really the things that you talked about, giving specific direction to these coming changes in our community, ultimately ends up to Member Patel's point that if we're clear, we can have a cost negative effect overall, potentially. With the process. So
well, and I would think with AI and some other tools available, I mean, you now have AI tools available that we can import, and people can submit plans. AI can do a quick review. It's going to spit out, not to say that we should do away with our reviewers. That's not where I'm headed, but somebody can do that, and they can have a report spit out that says, hey, you've got everything right except for these two things. And then that comes into the city for formal review. Those tools are out there and available, which are cost neutral on the people side. Yeah, you got to have the software, you've got to have those types of things, but there's those are, I think, working smart, not necessarily harder, as we go through it.
One additional, for me, critical factor of success, or what success looks like in this whole process, just for y'all's edification, my background is in development construction in other cities, and every developer, every individual property owner, and I think for the municipality as well, they don't want to go through 2, 3, 4, 5 plan reviews. We end up doing that frequently, but if a critical success factor could be that we get this UDC clear enough that with maybe one PD and one submittal, we get this right, it makes things cleaner for everybody. It makes it much faster, it makes it much user-friendly. Maybe 2 at the most, but when you've got to do submittal after submittal after submittal after submittal until it finally passes, that's what really creates a challenge. So as far as I'm concerned, I think a success factor there would be efficiency of the overall process as well.
Any other questions, comments along those lines? All right, we can move forward. Oh, Mr. Chair.
Just to add to your comments, Mr. Mayor, it might be to also add an urban townhome product to the UDC, urban style, similar to the Sullivan Brothers that came in or that are currently under construction, the 30-foot wide lots, 25-foot wide lots, it might make sense, as well as duplexes. Other towns are considering duplexes and are put them in their guidelines, and I don't think we have those for the current market that's out there.
Yeah.
And last thing,
they're successfully being done in master plan communities around the greater Houston area. And they're not a detractor. They're actually, and they're very expensive. They're not.
Absolutely.
This isn't necessarily addressing the missing middle or affordability, but it's not something that we should be afraid of.
Exactly, and as well, now that I think about it, when you said that, Chesmar, I know they came in, or they were wanting to do a product in the Massey Ranch. I think they called it Town Square or something Square.
It's their Town Square product.
Right. It's four townhomes on one lot that was 120 by 120.
But they're detached product.
Yes, sir. 4 homes instead of 2. Greater AV, greater tax, less infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe something like that. The one thing that I have noticed that the planning and zoning spends time on, and staff in particular spends time on, is a UDC regulation that's something about a 3-to-1 rule, and maybe Martin can elaborate on that. But it's a 3-to-1 ratio, and we get the variance requests quite often. And I think we should do away with that. Maybe let staff make that decision at their level. And if the answer is a no, maybe the variance is that they come to the planning and zoning to get a second look. So saving time and those kind of things. So thank you.
All right.
Really excellent feedback, everybody. Thank you. So to reiterate, we're not starting from scratch here. We're updating this the code, and we're building on a lot of the recent work and not too far in the past work that's been done in Pearland. As I mentioned, the Old Town Revitalization Plan has also started, and so it's good timing that we'll be working in tandem. The Pearland 2040 plan was just adopted, and so that's this is one of the recommendations from that plan. So we're moving forward with some implementation from that, which is great. And then we listed a couple of others here: the Pearland Prosperity Plan, and then the Broadway Corridor Development Study that was done. So those are all things that we're reviewing now and getting familiar with, and we'll weigh into our diagnostic analysis of the current code. So to clarify what the UDC update is updating the current UDC and revising language to address things that we've been discussing here tonight, such as zoning, subdivision, building and site design, development procedures, nonconformities, administration and enforcement, and definitions. This project is not, however, we're not looking at property tax policy. We're not creating a list of capital improvements. This is an infrastructure park or other public improvements design. building and fire code, engineering design criteria manual. We will be looking at those and making sure that we're being clear in what is the UDC and eliminating conflicting information out of those documents. We are, and this is not a complete rewrite of the existing UDC. So just wanted to be clear with what this is and what it is not. So the goals for this project, we have 5 here. The first one being to streamline the code, improving the current zoning ordinance. We're establishing standards that achieve quality and resilient outcomes in development and redevelopment. We're aligning regulations with city policies and community values, and a lot of that was in the adopted comprehensive plan. We're improving user friendliness with intuitive graphics. And finally, we're enhancing the review and approvals procedures. And I appreciate all of the feedback and the comments that we've heard tonight that help clarify these goals and probably add on and wordsmith these a little bit. So the various bodies that will be looking at this code closely, these are 3 broad categories, but we outlined what those bodies can understand as their tasks for this code update. So this body that's meeting tonight, Council and P&Z, will help us to monitor the plan progress. So for the next 18 months, we'll be doing those regular check-ins with you. You'll provide guidance for code adoption. You'll make recommendations to staff, the stakeholder committee, and the consultants, and you'll review code updates with us. The stakeholder committee, we'll be meeting with them at 5 times throughout this process as well. They will equip us with the technical assistance and feedback on the code analysis and updates. They'll help to review before public meetings the materials that we'll present at those opportunities. They'll help us provide data, understanding previous plans and reports, case studies, et cetera. So this is going to be really helpful in working with staff and those that are reviewing the code and working with developers on the code to understand on the ground what the issues are, and also helping to monitor the plan progress. And finally, last but not least, the Pearland community. We do have 2 public meetings throughout this process, and at those meetings, we'll invite the community to provide feedback and insight on the future of Pearland's development and redevelopment opportunities, and also to engage city staff on key topics that are important to them related to community values and anything else they see that would like to be addressed in this plan. Touching on how we might engage folks, we have a lot of tools at our disposal in the community engagement plan that was part of phase 1. It's one of our deliverables that we'll be working on next. We'll plug into where it is most appropriate to use these tools, depending on the audience that we have. But we will, in addition to having in-person workshops, can also work virtually. There's public comment opportunities, either through scanning a QR code, going to a website, emailing directly one email address where those emails will make it to the consultant team. Our stakeholder committee, of course, providing feedback as we go through the draft update process. Online surveys, and then graphic visualization. As we are creating these graphics for the code, we will be utilizing those in survey questions and website updates that can help people understand where we're heading. And we can make sure that we're really clear with those graphics before they make it into the final update. So walking you through the process here, we'll outline each of these 5 workshop points so you can get an understanding of what we'll be doing in each. And I do want to highlight, as the mayor had mentioned, the Texas legislation session starts next year. And we will be getting lots of updates on what affects cities and their codes. So that should happen around meeting 3. But we will, our team will be very cognizant of what's coming down the pipeline even before anything is officially adopted, that we can update staff and council and P&Z on where that might be heading. So the first meeting here, we're at the kickoff, just getting you aligned to the project. The next time we come back, we'll be reviewing code issues with our analysis and diagnostic that we're doing. We'll have be reporting back on the first public meeting that we would have had, and going through a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis. So that's a planner term. We like to say SWOT, but that's looking at the strengths of the code, the weaknesses of the code, and what the opportunities are and what could threaten the code success. And we'll have a council workshop to review any additional code issues and analysis. And then as we head into about halfway through the project, we're presenting code updates, the outline of what those code updates are, providing our thoughts on the code gaps and our initial recommendations. So this is about a 50% marker. At the 4th time we're coming back, we're testing the 50% draft code updates for feedback. And then at the 5th workshop, this is before we get to the adoption and implementation stage, we're presenting a 90% draft for final revisions and thoughts, comments on the graphics. So an example of topics that could come up, this list is not exhaustive, and I look forward to hearing from the folks here tonight on what we might add to this list. But zoning and CUP uses, parking calculations, non-conformities created by eminent domain, such as Broadway and TxDOT, the platting process, food trucks, incentive options for placemaking like art, the materials that are used to build, landscape and infill strategies, various housing types, the Old Town Revitalization Plan, such as setbacks, parking options, and quantity, adaptive building design and preservation, landscaping requirements, minimum hotel standards, placemaking like complete streets, sidewalk design, signage, lighting, and amenities in the public realm, the review and approval processes, and staff permissions. So I'll leave it on this slide and open it up for thoughts and comments from council members and commissioners on example topics that other thoughts that you might have had to address in the code update.
Mr. Chair, I'll start with you guys. I know we kind of gave a list a little bit ago, but we'll go to P&Z first.
I'd mentioned this at the last P&Z meeting, but the only thing I want to say is on our utility easements, it kind of brought this past hurricane kind of emphasized a lot of things when they started coming through here and trimming trees. I think we need to look at our setbacks on what's allowed to go in those utility easements, because where we had some really pretty trees, you know, now there's trees with big V's cut in the middle of them, and they're horrific looking. Now it's got to be done. You know, the payoff on it is that we don't have the outages that we had this last storm. I think unless they've changed it in the last 6-7 years, there's a minimum of 10 feet away from an electrical conductor. That way, when that wind gets up and stuff, it's not taking out your electrical lines just by slapping the trees, slapping the electrical lines. Another thing that you might not be aware of is anytime that you allow a deep-rooted tree and you allow them to plant it over the gas lines, it goes down and it wraps around that gas line. So if the tree gets blown over, then you've got a gas leak, which can be very detrimental to the public. It's not just an outage then it becomes something very dangerous. I just think that that's when we're looking at the landscaping requirements, we need to really think about what we're putting in those areas. But that's the reason why I know it's kind of a little late to the party here, because we've got 76% of it already done. But I think we need to, going forward, what we've got, we need to pay attention to it. All right, thank you.
I would just add that, especially as we're getting into the zoning districts and what we're looking at, that we need to look at the fiscal, connections with that. We've legislated to an extent against density, but that's also raised the cost of lots, and that's raised the taxable requirements of residential versus everything else, and it reduces our ability to pay for the infrastructure we're requiring them to put in. So it looks great when a subdivision comes in and we get a brand new road and new homes and nice lots. In 20 years, those houses aren't paying the cost to replace those streets and those lines. And I think we need to make sure we understand the economic realities of construction standards versus long-term maintenance of our infrastructure.
With that, I would add lot size is important there as well. The cost of that infrastructure, if you go from a 50 to a 60-foot lot, increases 20%, and thus the repair thereof, and coming back 20 years later to revise, or 30 years later to redo a water line or a sewer line, 20% more expensive for the city to come back in. So that might need to be a thought if we do look at lot sizing. I did have a couple of things that I haven't mentioned yet, and I think one of them fits. Number 3, I know of a couple of examples where the city's right-of-way needed to be expanded, and I'm saying it's the cities. I don't know if it's the cities or the counties or whose, but the right-of-way was expanded, and it affected the building setbacks. And I in my opinion, if landowner comes in, they should have the same setback as everyone else. If they get expanded, to me, by right, they should their setback should be reduced accordingly. That was one thing. To be specific, one of the things with Old Town Site, I don't believe Old Town Site currently, the boundary thereof, goes to Walnut and McLean. I think there's a gap there, and it stops somewhere short of going down Walnut, let's say from here. It doesn't make it to McLean. To me, it
doesn't go across Walnut.
Not on the other side of the street?
The other side. So Walnut, east-west, south side of Walnut is not technically in the Old Town Site. And I think where you're going with that is if we're going to be, looking at that area, we need to be looking at both sides of the road.
Absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate that correction. And then we have a Garden O'Day mixed-use district. I remember when we discussed those back in 2006 and 7, we talked about some of the other streets, but we just weren't there yet. I think it's time for us to look at, does O'Day fit on there? Does maybe Wagon Trail going south of 518, is that a corridor that we want to consider, the same type of rules and regulations? They seem to have that same feel. And then lastly, from a 10,000 foot level, we are an infill town. So I hope the rules and procedures, the processes we come up with help that infill get filled in the right way, the way the council's vision wants it to be. And that this UDC rewrite, allows and assists that infill process. There's multiple parcels that cannot be developed now, or it's very difficult to be developed now, and maybe cost prohibitive because of our rules. Speaking of Walnut and Old Alvin, that southeast corner right there, surrounded by the multifamily. there's not enough depth there. It's a small parcel, but the old, I'm sure when they did that, when they constructed the multifamily, that was probably enough depth for a filling station or whatever it is they had a vision for. Same with the neighborhood. I can never remember the neighborhood. It has the wood streets. It's just north of the 9th grade center and Turner.
Springfield.
Westwood Village, thank you.
Westwood Village in Springfield.
Westwood Village, McLean, and Veterans on the other side. Those 4 parcels as you enter the neighborhood from each direction, that could have been a great use of new rules and regulations to allow for flexibility and allow for a new building or a new construction, something that would have improved the area. And I think those parcels, if I'm not mistaken, they came in and they wanted to do some sort of office product. The neighbors shot them down. They came back with townhomes. They got shot down. And now they're at R4. I don't know that they're ever going to get developed under R4. But we have to have the rules and regulations in place to make that flexibility and the ability to construct something there and something that's better for the community than vacant land. Thank you.
All right, we'll bring it to council, but I will say, I think our engineering design criteria manual has changed over the years as well. So our construction of streets, water, sewer, drainage, and everything else, and that criteria today versus even 20 years ago is probably better. Trey, did you want to add to that?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor. Just to echo 2 of the points made, and this was one of the points that I tried to bring up when I was working at Brazoria County when it came to property acquisition in terms of right-of-way use or for right-of-way. I always felt that once right-of-way was acquired to obtain the ultimate thoroughfare, whatever it may be, the remaining project should not be subject to, again, the current standard of setbacks. Meaning if the setback for a thoroughfare is 55 or 60 feet, to try not to have the developer build permanent structures in what will ultimately become right-of-way. The minute we acquire the necessary right-of-way for the ultimate build-out, minimums apply. Because you cannot have your cake and eat it too, or else that parcel will not be developable by any stretch of the imagination. And then the other one was, sorry, I lost my train of thought. For innovative infill projects, I would encourage that something may be pretty and beautiful and we want it, but if the current infrastructure cannot support that means of development without major renovations, i.e. increases in water line, additional sewer line increases, although our engineering standards may address that to a point, that shouldn't, who's then going to pay for that? Typically, if it's a new grass-filled project, it's on the developer to some extent. Some extent it might be on the city, but much to the point where we don't want the UDC affecting our staff and having to do more work. We don't want infill projects affecting the need to do more and more upgrades to current infrastructure in spite of, oh, it looks really, really pretty, let's put it in. Because if we put that on the developer, guess what? They're not going to do it. Meaning, oh, the road needs to be widened to accommodate that development because of all of the traffic you're being in. They're just not going to do that. But yet we want it and it looks really good. So we may take that upon ourselves and thus dip into our pockets to make that happen. And I don't think that's necessarily feasible.
Open it up to council. Mr. Koza?
I'd like to kind of tag on to Commissioner McDonald, Haskins, and Fortes when they made comments. It all boiled down to money. One thing that in our current UDC that's required is electric lines being buried. We have thousands and thousands of miles of electric lines. I got a picture from a constituent of a new development right across the street from them that I just showed it to the council member Chavaret here, and she goes, "That's ugly." And it's one of those deals that when we think about it, we also need to be thinking about the property owner as well. Because if we're going to require people to bury lines when we have thousands of miles above ground to begin with, it's one of those deals. To me, it's kind of an oxymoron where you're doing this and you save a small run of electric lines, yet we got thousands of them. So those type things we need to look at as well when we're in there going through the process to where it makes sense and not just because we want to have electric lines buried. So.
That's a good point. Questions, comments on this? I will say, so Daryl, I got a question. Since you've come out of that industry, I want to talk about easements. If you go into a typical residential neighborhood and you've got lots that back up to each other, typically they take their 16 feet and they do 8 and 8. But if you have nothing backing up to you, they still want to take 16 feet out of a single. I'd like to send a message to CenterPoint, we're only going to do 8.
Well,
I
this is speaking from,
Yeah.
I've been retired 6 years, but that was always a big gripe with me, especially when they started putting the water and the sewer out front. They still wanted that utility in the back. And the way that it was structured on the electric side, it was supposed to be on the north and the east side of the properties. Like if you had back-to-back properties, you would have the electric and the telephone would go in the cable television would all go in the north and east. And it's the same way on the utility lines that are overhead. Everything is structured for your phasing is ABC, and it's north to south, east to west. And you know, when they started putting the wets out front, that really, I never did understand why they still required that, because there's nothing going in that easement.
And now with
the joint trench. And you're welcome.
Yeah, now with joint trench. And so I don't know if this is a UDC question. Maybe it's something that we have additional workshop opportunity with somebody like CenterPoint and others. But with infill projects and compact residential and only having 24% left of our city to develop, it's going to be harder and harder pieces to develop. And the next thing you know, you've got a backyard and as a residential piece, and you have zero space to use it. Zero space to use it, because if it doesn't back up to something, and even if it backs up to something that's already there, they'll still require you to do 16.
Yes.
And so,
well, I think a lot of that might have to do something with if they ever have to come back and replace certain things. They want something, and like I said, this is just strictly my own opinion. It may be that it's easier to go back and install it in those free easements. Now, on the electric, the one thing that CenterPoint has they've gotten away from it and went back to it. I don't know what their current standing is putting in a conduit system for their electrical, putting in conduit system for the telephone and for the CATV. That way they don't have to go in there. Number one, there's a reason for it. This ground down here pulls on that electrical cable. And, you know, the argument is that, well, this new cable is supposed to be good for 25 years. Well, the old cable was too. And it didn't last. But making them put it in a conduit system so they don't have to go back in there and tear things up is a big plus. And Pearland, I believe, was one of the few areas that when they come out and told them that they were doing away with the conduit, insisted that in their areas they put it in conduit.
Okay.
And so we're talking strictly about easements, but the only thing I can do is speculate that the reason that they still require it is in order to have a place to go back if they have to rebuild it.
All right. Any other questions on example of topics, any additional topics? I know we put a few more on this list already. I think we'll end up with a good list when it's done.
Mayor, just tagline on what Daryl was saying. If you have a transmission line behind your property, CenterPoint not only requires a 30-foot air easement, but the utility easement is in additional to that air easement. And there's no reason why an easement could not be underneath the air easement rather than taking up more usable property of the landowner.
Right. Ms. Kay, did you signage? It's on, okay. All right. Any other questions or comments? Mayor Pro Tem?
Just a few. If you go back to that slide that says what is and what isn't in the scope, yeah, I tracked with everything until the right column where it says complete rewrite of existing UDC. My thought is we're completely rewriting the UDC, and so help me understand that. Except for the tree ordinance, we've hashed that out.
We checked that box, right? No.
So, thank you, Member Carbone, and also glad someone did work in a tree joke because I got talked off of it. But no, and I think that terminology is something that's slowly evolved across elected and appointed officials. I think from staff's perspective and with the funding that was provided, this was always intended to be an update. And if you go back, I don't know how many years, but more years than I've worked here, the goal was always a user-friendly, and I want to say it even started with just being like hyperlinked. People wanted to be able to click on something and it go to that section in the UDC. And you know the history when it comes to just getting the funding and then the debacle, and, you know, this got pushed a few years, and over those few years, our terminology kind of evolved into a bigger scope. And that's why we wanted to intentionally put that up there about not every word of this is intended to be touched. Now that said, this is going to be very thorough, and we want to make sure we highlight a variety of topics, and I hope that through the discussion and then we get to the example topics, y'all can see some of the similarities that staff and design workshop already have with what y'all are talking about.
I mean, I hear that, but the original UDC was written by a bunch of attorneys, and so now you have to hire engineers or attorneys to interpret it. And so if we're not rewriting it, what are we doing?
Yeah, I mean, we would have to discuss the change of scope, I would, honestly.
Let's do it now. Oh yeah, let's get to the bottom of it. I don't want to get to the bottom of it after we spend $300K and sit here and we completely shot expectations and they're asking for more budget.
I'm very grateful that you bring that up then, as far as getting to the bottom of it. And if expanding the scope is something to do, I would be incredibly grateful for that window.
Let me ask a question on that then. So go back to, you know, what does success look like? Right. And we change that. In your minds, what does success look like? Let's throw out rewrite. What does that look like?
Let me get back to that slide.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I struggle. I'm fine with this definition of success, but I struggle getting to this end goal of success without rewriting the whole thing. Like that in my mind, how are we going to hit this, and how's this going to be successful without rewriting the UDC?
I think that is an excellent thing to bring up, and if that is the expectation, and we have consensus across y'all, glad to work back with Design Workshop and look at what amending that scope would look like and bring back a cost.
So maybe before we jump to that, we can get design workshop to weigh in on, because we are doing much more than an update as the scope does entail today. So maybe if they can distinguish between what the update as we have scope today is versus a complete rewrite. Because I think, the update was intended to address the main areas of concern, do that updating of the way it's written, provide the graphics, provide some clarity in a lot of the language that's confusing and things like that. But it wouldn't take the whole thing and chunk it out and start writing from scratch. So maybe design workshop can weigh in on the scope we have today versus what they would consider a complete rewrite.
I would just say I think that summary is accurate. That this scope is written with the assumption that there are certain portions of your code that are working okay, and that we don't need to go in and do a complete rewrite. The tree ordinance is one example of an area that we were not planning on touching. I think another area that we want to continue to work through in conversation is we're not anticipating a full rewrite to the sign code, for instance. There might be some tweaks to that, but it's not a complete and utter overhaul of signage requirements. So we're trying to be really targeted in making sure that our time and the community's time is spent really digging into some of these key issues that we've talked about tonight versus everything under the sun. If we're looking at a more complete rewrite and really starting from scratch, timeline probably increases, and so that was, I think, another factor of wanting to make sure that this is completed in spring of 2026. A full rewrite is typically closer to 24 months in length, just in terms of needing to have some additional review time and things like that. So there's a budget, but also perhaps more importantly, a time impact to moving to a full rewrite.
I'm completely uncomfortable now. I mean, you look at this screen, success, 100% behind it, and now I feel like the on time, on budget through every stage of the process, we're going to start getting, well, that's limited scope, that's outside of the scope.
And Member Carbone, I completely appreciate where you're at right now and went through some very similar mental exercise getting through the RFQ process. The not outside the scope part is not something we anticipate hitting. I mean, this is going to be a thorough update. And with that, and I think this is something y'all will agree with, about to find out, whenever you think of those top issues that we consistently see, is it less than 20? Is it a dozen? I think, and so in that is where I find the confidence about the update being okay. Because if you really look at the stuff that we consistently see and that we can grit our teeth on, it's a dozen things. And then the rest of that can get put into the user friendliness and the graphics and the GIS integration, which I think is more important almost. Whenever it comes to the actual issue, it is the user friendly part, not necessarily some of the content. The rules could be good, they're just difficult to understand.
And I think that's the rewrite. It's making it more friendly and easier to understand. So we rewrite the sentence.
If I may, I've kind of been through this process at the county as well, through subdivision ordinances and regulations, and we effectively rewrote the Brazoria County subdivision regulations. We touched every page, every section, but sentences and paragraphs were kept, moved around, this and that, and the effectiveness is, yes, a new UDC in this particular case, but you're keeping parts and pieces that make sense, and you're explaining them better with subtext and subparagraphs and whatnot. So effectively, yes, you have a new one, but no, we didn't rewrite certain paragraphs and add more language or this or that, but it was clarifying, adding in additional documents that we were bringing it to play and so on and so forth. So I don't know if that means a whole mountain of anything, but.
Well, the ladies behind you were nodding their head yes, so I think so. Very good. Now that helps. The only other, two other comments, make sure we've engaged the chamber. A lot of small business represented there. And then we laughed about tree ordinance. For those hot topics, bring them back. Don't waste a bunch of y'all's time and staff's time. I don't know how much time is spent wasted on trees. Bring us something and get 7 votes or 6-1 up or down. I flash back to ADUs and tree ordinances. Like, don't bang y'all's head against the wall for something like that that's going to be highly, I'll say political, but if you know there's opinions up here, so get them and let's move on.
Which is
Not
one of the
waste
reasons why I
time.
said when the legislature changes the rules,
Yeah.
that's bring those in because we're going to have to weigh in on it. Mr. Patel?
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Carbone brings up a good point. I guess what would be helpful for me, at least, maybe you guys can point out the exact sections you guys really plan to work on in details that you feel like are the top 10 things, and what other areas you feel don't need to be touched, right? That, hey, they're fine the way they are. We just aren't going to waste our time. So I think that would certainly help me. So.
And I think that's when you look at, I don't know what slide number it is, but there's kickoff goals and then there's workshop number 2 goals right there. I think that's the list you're talking about. It's getting right there after they've done their analysis.
Well, it sounds like they already have a list in their mind that they're going to be working on. Am I wrong in saying that, Vince?
No, not at all. I mean, through the variety of meetings that we've all gone to, staff has just jotted down, like Commissioner Fuertes brought up, the 3-to-1 item. He has consistently said, this is something we think staff could have the right to do. And so it's going to be those types of items. But we would like to hear from y'all just as far as if you think of something, feel free to start emailing us. Hey, this came to me. We bump our head on that. But we do have a pretty extensive list.
Is there a way you can share that list? Thank you.
Okay. You got it. Any other topics? Where are we towards, where did we get to? Example topics, we only had a couple more slides. Next steps.
Yes, we're almost through. So next steps for us after this workshop today is sharing out the project management plan. So the draft vision and the goals that we presented today, along with some edits to that based on feedback. The community engagement plan, we also mentioned that and the different tools that we might engage for the various groups and meetings. The in-depth code review and analysis. This will be presented to staff in the form of a memo that summarizes and our findings. And then looking at the current GIS mapping that the city has and a review of the land use code and permitted uses. So we'll be back here in March, but with a lot of work in between now and then. That is also the time of when we will have a public meeting. Again, we don't have any dates firm yet. That will be presented in the community engagement plan that we're preparing after this meeting. And so just to close, we've heard a lot tonight about this, but just final thoughts, whether it's answering this question about what will make this project a success or any other closing thoughts you'd like the consultant team and staff to understand or know before we leave you tonight.
All right, we'll kick it off. Mr. Chair, do you guys have any final thoughts, comments across the board?
I think we said what we had to say.
All right,
Thank
turn
you.
it to council. Any wrap-up, final comments, thoughts, Mr. Patel?
I would echo what Member Carbone said. I'd rather you guys bring things up front ahead, not wait till March. If there are issues you feel like council needs to be aware or if it's a hot topic, I think the key is communications with the council and obviously P&Z. Thank you.
Good catch. All right, Trent, any final thoughts, comments?
Just to kind of summarize a couple things I heard, I think we'll follow up with a memo and capture the additional topics that were added via comments tonight. Of course, engage Chamber of Commerce. I think that was part of the plan, but we'll make sure that is a big part of it. And then I think we can do a little bit more to maybe address that concern of an update versus a full rewrite. And I think the suggestion to identify specifically what sections will be worked on in detail and what sections are good probably goes a long way to helping with that. So we can summarize that as well. And then obviously we heard that when we have items that we know are going to take some discussion and potentially controversial, get those in front of you early for input and get some decisions made. And then we've had some discussions as part of this plan of getting things in front of you early, getting some decisions made, and getting those implemented. So, you know, we can accommodate that as well. So, anything else from a summary standpoint we need to make sure we hit that I missed?
So, Vance, did you have something?
Yeah, sorry, I missed my mute button. No, I just wanted to kind of address what Member Patel mentioned. So we're going to go into like a kind of a cultivating phase right now, where we're going to dig up these topics, and essentially the first two workshops that we come back with, P&Z and council, are going to be to chew on these difficult things and the direction. And it is exactly what y'all are calling out. It's not so we bash our head on it or put something together in a stakeholder group that this body's not going to agree on. It's so that we can do it as a full group.
So how do we appoint the stakeholder group, Vince? Is each council member get to appoint
Yeah, I was going to
somebody?
say, I didn't hear next steps on the
Yeah.
stakeholder. Yeah.
So just in Old Town, we put together an email. We'll draft something up and send it to Council 1 and P&Z for y'all to make suggestions on who you'd like to serve on the stakeholder committee. And then typically that included a phone number or email, and I reached out to him personally for Old Town.
Sounds good. I'd like to thank the guys from Design Workshop. You guys, thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for the upfront early work so far, putting this presentation together. Hopefully you get the sense I think we're ready for something new. I'm not going to necessarily say different, but new, that we can propel our city the next 20, 25 years, you know, forward. You know, and even what we come up with will be amended over time. That's just the way these documents go. But I think you get the sense we want to chart the course for the next, you know, couple of decades, and take a serious deep dive into it. Serious topics, serious time, and we'll come up with a good document and a good change. So thank you for your time and effort tonight, and we look forward to seeing where this is moving. With that, we will move to adjournment at 5:37.